Alright, so I'm going to show you how to make a responsive navbar. It looks like this. So if you scroll down, you can see it here. So I'll just click on it, and you can see, ooh, yep, it's got buttons. That's great. But if I were to shrink it down, ooh, it turns into a menu button. Oh! And when you click it, it does a menu. But you can see it does that, and that's pretty exciting stuff. Alright, so that's basically what we're going to be making. So you can see the example right here, and if you right click, you could save link as, and then you could download it and open it up in like Microsoft Visual Studio Code or Dreamweaver or whatever, and you can kind of see how the code's looking. Okay. Over on the right here, as per usual, I have the HTML code that's in it. This is the CSS code that's in it, and this is the JavaScript. Okay. And over here is basically just an explanation of what's happening. So I just try to write what each part is and why they are written like that. So that way you get kind of both. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make this navbar. Alright, so we need to go ahead and make the basic doc type and all that. I'm actually going to pause it and just do that real quick, and then I'll restart it so you got to watch me write it. Okay, so I wrote the basic thing. So now on the head, I'm just going to go ahead and put title, and we'll just say navbar. Okay, so we have a title, and then I'm also going to have to put that meta that controls meta name that lets us do responsive stuff, so that it allows us basically to sample the viewport being the window viewport. Okay, and content, and it's going to be width dash. This is something I would if I were you, I would just width equals. What am I doing? Width equals device width. That I would probably personally just copy and paste, because I don't think it's initial dash scale. We're going to set that equal to 1. Yeah, wrong one. There we go. Okay. So this just sets up so it allows us to sample, if you remember the thing. And let's go ahead and do the HTML next. Okay, so I'm going to tab it in. And we're going to do an unordered list, because that's how we do our stuff. And then we're going to have a list item for each link. So I'll do list item. Alright, so list item. And then inside that list item is going to be an href. And we're just going to put a money symbol in there for now, so it doesn't go anywhere. And then I'm just going to we'll just write link. Okay? So basically, this is what we'd have. We have a bunch of these, Control C, Control V, Enter, Control V, Control V, right? So we'll just do 4. And this would typically give us our normal, let me minimize this and boop, right? Which you would typically see, there's our normal thing, okay? So now we have to change this a little bit in order to make this work better. Alright, so what I need to do is I need to add some IDs and classes to things so that I can use them with my code later on, and also so I can format them. So first off, I need to make, since my whole navbar is inside this unordered list, I'm just going to go ahead and add ID to it. So we'll do ID, and I'm just going to call it navbar, because that's what this is. And then on all of my list items, I'm just going to go ahead and add a class called nav, and I'll just copy that. Let's Control C, Control V, Control V, Control V. Okay, so now they all have the nav, so I can grab each one of those individually, so I can make them either stack or make them, either stack vertically or horizontally, which is good. So those all now have that. Now, what I want to do is actually have a home button, and I want to have that like that menu button, because right now all I have is I just have these links. So I'm going to go ahead and add another list item that's going to be my menu button, which will be off by default. This is obviously going to have the nav class because it's just like any of the other buttons, but we're also going to add an ID to it. I'm just going to call it menu btn for button. Did I do that right? I think I put a U in there. Okay. Menu btn, and that is good. Okay. Now inside of that, oops, there we go. We're going to go ahead and put our, because this is going to be a little bit more, we're going to go ahead and put our, an ahref, as per usual. Again, we'll put the money symbol in there so that we know what it is. Okay. And let me go over here. All right. And then what I'm going to do in order to make the menu button, if you remember, it's those 3 lines. I call it like a hamburger. There's a couple ways of doing this. You could like download an icon. You could use an image. You could use Font Awesome, which we'll discuss later. But in this case, because it's just 3 lines, I think I can kind of fake it. So I'm just going to kind of make something up. So we're going to put a div inside of here. And I'm just going to call this one an ID hamburger. So this is the way I'm going to control what's inside of here. So like this hamburger ID, this will be my icon. And that icon is just going to be made up of a bunch of P's that are dashes, like that. Okay? And I'm just going to do 3 of them, because I think that's how many there normally is. So Control V, Control V. All right? And if we were to save that and refresh this, you can see it's going to be these 3 dashes, which doesn't look like much, because obviously they got to be right next to each other, and they've got to be formatted a little bit differently. But that's basically what it's making. It thinks that this is one big button. So that's what we're trying to do there. So that's how I'm going to get to this. Now, yeah, okay. So that's good for that. Let's go ahead and up here, let's go ahead and style the stuff here so it looks better. Thought I was up there. Did I? Okay, I don't know. Okay, so we're going to add a style. And it's going to be a whole lot of stuff. So first off, on the body, generally speaking, I always put a body one in there just so that everything already has. We'll do font family, and then you can choose the one that makes you feel good. I usually like to do some sort of sans serif font, but it's good to put like a body one there just so you kind of almost set defaults. So margin, right? And we'll do 0px. I don't like to put any margin. I usually take out padding too. Another thing I'm gonna do is the box sizing. Why does it keep moving on me? Okay, it didn't. Okay, box. Sizing, and we'll just do border box, and that just makes sure that if we have a border or padding, it doesn't go beyond the width and height of the element. Okay, so we'll call that one good. Now we're going to go ahead and format our links. So a link and also a visited. Now, if you remember, visited is if you click and you come back. By default, it will actually it will like be purple or something, and you can make it so it's different. I'm just gonna do them both as the same because I don't really find it super useful. So color, I'm just gonna go ahead and say white is fine for now. So the default's gonna be white. The background, hyphen color, and I'm just gonna go ahead and make that gray. Okay, and then the display, we're gonna go ahead and do inline block. That way it'll be they'll have a little bit of inline, a little bit of block, so it should make them have like solid colors behind them. And we'll do width. I'm just going to do 100px. So you might have to change this depending on the size of the buttons that you want. I'm just going to go ahead and do 100. Padding, and I'm just going to do 10px. This just makes it, if you remember, so that when we have the background color, it doesn't go right to the words. There'll be a little bit of a gap between that, the content, and the outside. Text align. I like to just do center for my buttons. Usually looks a little bit better. And another thing we need to do is take off text decoration and do none, because otherwise it has those little underlines, which we don't really like. And then I'm just going to make it a little bit thicker, so we'll do 700. Okay, so it'll be a little bit bold. It won't be like super bold, but it'll be a little bit. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like when it's linked. Let's go ahead and do an A hover. So when you're hovering over it with your mouse, what's it going to look like? So we'll do color, and I'm just going to go ahead and do black, and then we'll do background. Bad at spelling. Background color, and I'm just going to do light gray. Okay. All right. Then let's go ahead and the list items, we're going to go ahead and make it so that they don't stack. Because if you look at our default right now, I'll leave that right now. If you look at our default right now, see how it's like this? I want the default just to be across, okay? So we're going to go ahead and do in the list items, because list items obviously stack, because it's a bulleted thing. So we're just going to go ahead and do list style type, and we're going to go ahead and do none. That will remove the bullets, and then we'll also do display, oops, and we will do inline, okay? So, so you can kind of see what we have so far. I'm just going to go ahead and save it and refresh, and you can see now they go across, right? Because we did inline, I put the gray background, it made all the buttons 100 width, all right? Which obviously this one's a little bit taller because we haven't formatted this yet, but right, already looks a decent amount better. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and make the hamburger look better, the menu button, right? So I just called it hamburger, so we're just going to call it not hamburger, hamburger, and we're going to do it to the P elements inside of the hamburger. So basically what I'm trying to do is remove the gap in between each one of these, because if you look at our thing, you'll see that, right, there's a big distance between them. So I want to make each one of these items inside of it smaller. That'll make the overall button smaller. Well, I'll make them wider, but not as much stuff on it. We actually did quite a few to this, so we're going to do, because we're going to move these around a little bit, I have to go ahead and do position. And just go ahead and put relative, even though it's relative by default. We're going to do font size, and I'm going to go do 2EM, which is just generally going to make those bigger, right? So that's good. Transform, scale, and what we're going to do is 4, where's comma 1, okay? And what that's going to do is it's actually going to stretch it out. So when we do transform and then scale, what that actually does is it will it'll do X and Y. So it means it's going to be 4 times as large here and then 1 times as large as it is. So it means it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same height or scale on the Y-axis, the up and down, but horizontally it will be not. Okay. Then we're going to do margin. I don't need to add margin because I already took that off earlier. Let's do padding and set that to 0, just to, because we're just trying to get them to hug a little here. We're going to do top. We're also going to set that to 0, just to make sure that it's right on top of it. And the last thing that's going to help the most is we're going to do line height, and we're going to do 10px. Okay, and we might need to adjust that. We'll see how that looks. But basically, line height is the distance from the bottom, the baseline of this font, to this one. So if you make it smaller and smaller, these two, from one line to the next, they'll get closer to each other. Okay. So let's go ahead and hit Control R, and okay, that's a little bit better. Let me see. Maybe I'll add margin just in case. I'm not sure why it's not 0px. Control S. Control R. Okay, well I guess the margin was what it wanted. All right. So that's a little bit better. Let's look a little bit off, but let me see. That's not. There we go. Let me see. Is there anything else? Well, that's enough. What I could do is always just on the hamburger itself add some padding. Oops, not that. Let's see. Add some padding to this so it lines up with this, or check these ones, or not padding. Sorry, margin. Or check these and take the UL and take the margin off. I'm not 100% sure, but either way, you get the rough idea of what that is. All right. Good. Okay. Alrighty. So now what I want to do is actually set up some of our other things here. So what we're going to do is right now by default that menu button's on, right? This shouldn't be on unless it's smaller. So I'm going to turn that off by default in my code. So we're going to go ahead and do hashtag menu btn, and we're just going to do display and none. That just turns it off. Okay, so by default that will be off until we tell it to turn it on via JavaScript. Okay. Now the other thing I'm going to have to do in order to make this work like a responsive thing is I actually have to add some media queries. Okay, so we'll do @media. We'll say screen, and in this case it's going to be max width max width, and we're going to go 600px because that's small. Oops, 600px. Good. All right. Let's do this. There we go. 600px. Yoink. So basically, up until the max width is a certain size. Okay, so basically when it's under 600, so up to 600 pixels, this is what's going to happen. We're going to do list item, and we're going to set that up to list style type none. List style type none, just in case, to make sure that that still doesn't have a list style. Probably don't need that actually, but just to double check. Okay, and then we're going to do the menu button. We're going to turn the menu button on, right? Because when it's smaller than that, it should be on. So we'll do display, and we're just going to do block. That'll turn it on. Okay. I just like to do this so that it kind of makes it a little bit more truncated. And then we'll do dot nav. Okay, and we'll do display none. So that'll turn off the nav elements by default, so that way they're not on. Because obviously when truncates, it should all be down to 1 bit and not the other. So let me do this too. I'm going to take this guy and make him happen after this. Okay, like that. All right. Now you'll remember that this menu button is actually part of it, right? This also has the nav, but for one, I made it happen after, which it always reads the last one. That'll be the one that takes it'll override whatever the previously was written. That's just a double check. It should work anyway. But also, an ID is more specific than a class, right? Because a class is applied to many objects, an ID is only applied to one, which means this will supersede this one. Okay, so we have that, and the other thing I want to do is, oh, okay, we will wait. All right, we're gonna add, no, we'll do it now. So the other thing I want to do is add another at media screen, or at media. So at media, screen and max width, and we'll do 600 again, 600px. Oops, keep putting the semicolons in there. We're gonna add a new class, so res menu, which we didn't apply to anything yet, and we're just gonna go ahead and say display block, and you'll see what this is. So, oops, display block. Okay, so the idea here is this: what we're gonna do with JavaScript is that when when it's smaller, right, when up to 600 pixels, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and apply this display block on. We're gonna put this res menu class on all of these navs here. Okay, using JavaScript. So that way, when it's smaller and we attach this to it, what it'll do is that it'll make it stack, because see how it's display block and not display inline block. So by default, it has that inline block when it's longer, which means it'll stack horizontally. But when we do the block, it'll stack vertically, but only when it's this smaller size. And also, by default, it doesn't have that class attached to it. We're going to use JavaScript to attach it dynamically. All right. So let's go ahead and run our script. So we're going to go down here, and we're going to do script. Oh, good. And we're going to do a function that's going to do what we want. So we're going to do function. We can call it open menu. So basically, when we hit the menu button, it's going to click the menu button open. We're not going to send anything, and it's going to run everything inside this block of code. Okay. Now, right now, this will not run. So what we need to do is we need to add it to our menu button here, so that when we click on it, that's when it will run. So we're just going to go ahead and add this property here, on click, and we're going to say on click, I want you to run open menu. All right. So now we added this. So when you click on this link here, it's going to actually open menu, and that's going to run this function open menu. Okay. So we're going to do a variable that's going to hold the nav elements. So var nav l, nav elements. Okay. And we're going to set that equal to document.get elements by class name. And the elements we're going to get are all of the navs. Right. So nav. So it's going to store all these navs into a variable array. It's an array because it's many items. And we're also going to make a counter for a for loop. So we're going to do variable I, voila. All right, so that's set up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a for loop that's going to run through each one of those nav elements. So we'll do for I equals 1. Let's put some spaces in there so it looks a little bit nicer. I equals, set I to 1, and then while I is less than nav L dot length, did I do that right? Yeah, dot length. And then every time you run this, go ahead and add 1 to it. And it's going to run everything as this block. Now, you might have noticed every time we always write I-0, right? Why is it 1 this time? Because wouldn't we want to start with the first element? We actually want to skip the first element, believe it or not. And the reason why is because the first element, or the first nav element, so we have this one, right? Got 1, 2, 3, got all these. The first one's actually the menu button. So I don't want to hide that one. I want that one to actually be on. So this is actually going to disregard the first one and just do it to the rest of them. That's the idea behind it. Okay. So by starting at 1, it will disregard the first indexed item, and it starts from the top down when it reads it. So the first one it runs across is this one. So this will be in spot 0, and then this will be 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to skip the first one, which is what we want. That's why we did nav. That's why we did 1 for that. All right. If nav l, and so now what we're doing is we're testing each item. So if the one that we're currently on, so in this case item 1, because we started at 1 here, up here, right? So the first one that's in here, the second one, because it's 1, but this one here, right? So on that one, if that element, if the class name is equal to nav, so if it has, oops, I already did that, oops, if it has nav on it, go ahead and do nav l, and on the same item that we're on, the same indexed item in that array, class name, go ahead and add, plus equals means it will add it. Go ahead and add this string to it. So space first, res menu. Boom. And let's just close that out. Now we have to do space first, because what we're actually doing is if I wanted to add res menu to this, I would do space, oops, space, res, oops, menu, right? This is what it would look like. And it would have 2 different classes attached to it, this one and this one. All right, oops, nav. Now what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, if you have nav on it, which obviously it would anyway because it's up there, go ahead and just add this to it. But I need to put a space because otherwise it would be nav, it would look like this, nav, res, menu, and there's no class name that. So we have to put the space in there. So that's why that's like that. All right, then we're going to say else, you're going to go ahead and do nav l, oops, and we want to do the same, we're still working on the same item, dot class name, set that equal to nav. Now, you might be like, well, isn't that kind of the same thing? Kind of isn't, because here's the thing. What it's going to do is say, okay, is the class name this, but only this. So when it first starts off, that is the only thing that's in it, right? And if it is, it's going to go ahead and add this other class to it. So the class name will then become nav space res menu, right? But let's say it runs through it again. This is how it toggles. Let's say we click on that open menu again. What it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, is the class name, right up here, it's going to first go through, is class name nav? Well, it's not. It's nav space res menu. So then it's going to go back here, and it's going to set it back to just nav. That's the idea behind it. And we'll just save it and hope that it works by default. Control R. Okay, good. So the menu button's gone when it's big. And when we collapse it, good, it goes right there. So that looks good. And we click on it, opens up and closes. There you go. All right. Now here's the thing. Obviously, you might want to make this be the whole crossbar. You might want to change the fonts here. Obviously, colors. You know, a whole bunch of things. But by default, we now have the elements there that we would want. Okay. So hopefully you saw that. It's a lot of CSS actually, but it's kind of basic CSS. It's just to make things look a little bit nicer. So hopefully you get what happens there. So that's one of your options. It's a nice way you can kind of really control what the navbar looks like this way. All right, good luck.